Welcome to another video from Rennie Foresights. Alright, today we're going to look at crypto fundamentals. And what kind of factors can we look at to measurably see how a blockchain is doing? This is definitely not an exhaustive list of the things that we can look at. But for example, one of the things we can look at is something called TVL, total value locked. That means that on that blockchain, how much funds are put into it. This might be through staking, though I would be more cautious with staking. The reason for this is you're taking a blockchain's currency and then you're inserting its own currency into itself. So the amount of the actual TVL that is of a blockchain's own native currency in some cases can be really high. So it could have millions or billions of dollars of its own currency locked in. This is not necessarily the TVL that you would be looking for when you're looking for a TVL. When you're looking for TVL, what you're looking for is other currencies that have been taken and locked inside of something. So this doesn't necessarily have to be inside of a layer 1 protocol, a large blockchain like Ethereum. This could actually be inside a specific dApp. For example, one of the largest holders of TVL is a dApp called Aave. Aave has over $10 billion of TVL locked in it. Those are going to be not of Aave. They're going to be of other things. For example, they're going to be of like DAI, USDC, Bitcoin, Ethereum. It won't be Bitcoin, sorry. It will be wrapped Bitcoin, which is like a synthetic version of Bitcoin. What exactly that means, if you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. You're going to be able to see, okay, this one has this much funds locked in it, and this one has a larger or lesser amount of funds in it, especially removing that factor of its own coin. The reason for that is something could gain a ton of TVL just by the price of itself going up. And just making its own price go up and then still holding itself does not make something more valuable. Another factor that we can look at is things like total supply, circulating supply, and maximum supply. When we look at supply, we don't want to just say this thing has too much supply or this thing doesn't have enough supply. These things don't make any sense to me. Just there being a lot of something or being a little something alone doesn't really mean anything. These are just fractions. Fractions are neither good nor bad. What is important is things like how much of that supply is currently available. So for example, maybe in the future, this is going to have 1 million units. Of those 1 million units, only 10,000 of them are available now. That means that the market cap price of this thing is derived from only 10,000 of 1 million units. So you're gonna get a really small market cap, but as these other units, this basically inflation, comes out, this coin now has this exponentially larger value. It has to because of this new supply. If it cannot maintain that value, which would be what's called a fully diluted market cap, so you could just look at that number. What is the fully diluted market cap? If it can't get to that value, then that's something that you could also look at. This is a fundamental data piece. What would its fully diluted market cap look like? Some coins don't have a max supply, so they don't have a supply limit. When it doesn't have a supply limit, some people see this as a bad thing. This is the end of it, it's not good, it doesn't have an end. I tend to disagree with this. The reason why is something can continue to grow, but what we care about is inflation. And this is what most of these people are watching for also. By the maximum, they're saying, okay, well, we don't have much inflation left, so this makes me comfortable. By looking at something that continues to grow, has no limit, what we're looking at is what is the inflation per year. So the inflation per year could be inflating till eternity, so it never stops growing, it doesn't have a limit, but maybe it only grows by 0.1% a year. It's a really, really tiny growth rate, and wouldn't necessarily be seen as something that's going to completely devalue your coin because supply is going to surge out of control at a 0.1% a year growth rate. This is not rational. But maybe that number is 30% or 100 or 500% a year. Now we need to know this number. What is the inflation per year? Because this helps us realize how much new supply is going to rush in against my supply, and that the price of what I have is derived from supply and demand. So I'm looking at how much is this increase? And you can usually find this inside of a project's white paper. So you'd read through and you say, okay, this is our coin issuance schedule. Year 1, this many coins. Year 2, this many coins. In a lot of cases, you actually got to sit down and do calculations, figure out what it is. Another factor to consider with this issuance is, if this issuance is all given as the way that the network is secured. Okay, so somebody is validating your transactions, and as they validate your transactions, they get a reward. A lot of times this reward comes from this inflation. If this inflation is something like 500%, which is causing this person to want to validate for your network because they're getting a ton of coins, recognize that if that number goes down, you need to consider how much will this guy make in the future. Because if all of a sudden this person goes to making nothing, they're probably not going to want to do that validation anymore. Remembering that the reason they're doing it in the first place is because they're making a lot of money doing it. I've seen this. A few years ago, I actually went through a project's white paper, messaged the actual community, and said, hey, look, you have a problem here. Your coin's basically gonna just go up in supply, and then all of a sudden you have no money available to pay the validators. And the response from the team was basically, oh, someone's handling it, don't worry about it. Not really reassuring. I did not feel reassured at all. And I can tell you that that project doesn't exist anymore. After looking at that, we can look at other factors. Let's say we want to look at users. Okay, so users is going to be measured in different time frames. We could do monthly active users, we could do daily active users. Keeping in mind that users is a rough estimate because users is generally measured by wallet addresses. A user could actually have 52 addresses. There's nothing stopping them from having tons and tons of addresses. So one person could actually count as many people. It is not a perfect science. It might be measured in other ways, but generally this is the way that it's measured. Then another thing that you can look at is frequency of transactions. So you could say this network has 1,000 transactions, this network has 10,000 transactions. You're looking at different amounts of use of transactions. Then another fundamental thing that you would look at after looking at transactions is what kind of transactions are we talking about? Are we talking about $1 billion being transferred across the world? Or the blockchain recorded Fred playing a game and he dug a hole, because obviously $1 billion money transfer and digging a hole in a game don't equate to the same economic value, meaning that they're not equal transactions to provide the same value to the network. One transaction not equal to the other. Then on top of that, part of the way that we would get these numbers of the economic value would be things like volume. So how much is the transfer volume per day on that network? You could have 100,000 transactions of 1 penny transactional value, or you could have 10,000 transactions of $1 million worth of value. These are not going to weigh out transaction to transaction as some equal metric. We talked about how there was inflation. Networks also have fees. So how much does a transaction cost? Something to keep in mind is there's 2 ways to pay for security on a network. One of them is inflation. So maybe that inflation is 500%. Maybe that inflation is 0.1%. Either way, the question is that inflation paying for the network? Is it incentivizing somebody to do the work that is storing the blockchain data and processing the transactions? The second thing is fees. Fees also get distributed to these validators. If the person that is doing this validation makes a large amount of money in fees from the user using the network, this incentivizes them to have their personal interests aligned with the interests of the fee payer. This fee payer basically becomes a customer. It positively impacts both of these individuals that it doesn't come from inflation, because they become part of an economic system that is not just being inflated to gain value. All right, so this has been a few different, pretty basic metrics that can be used when starting out and you want to measure fundamentals of something. One other thing that I would just add is you could look at things like the team. Who is the team? What are they working on? Or the actual code repository, you could look at that. These are a little bit more complicated to do, because when you're looking at a code repository and you don't know anything about code, just seeing that somebody added code, meanwhile it's just a bunch of comments that they added, doesn't really give you value in a measurable sense. Knowing that somebody typed up a bunch of stuff that doesn't really do much is hard to measure when you can't actually look at it and say, oh wow, they added this interesting feature and it was here. Please like and subscribe, and if you have any questions about things that you'd like answered in the future, I'd be glad to look into that as well. Have a great day, and bye.